Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brandon believed he knew his wife better than anyone else. 5 years of marriage, a comfortable routine in Phoenix, Arizona, and a life that unfolded exactly as planned. He worked as a firefighter at the Central Station, while Amber managed a women's clothing store. It was a marriage without great passions, but also without major problems, or so Brandon thought until that October. The first time Brandon noticed something different was on a Sunday morning. Amber spent 40 minutes in the bathroom, unusual for someone who normally took 15 minutes to get ready. When she came out, Brandon looked up from the couch, confused. His wife wore a tight navy blue dress, high heels, perfectly curled hair, and full makeup with eyeliner and dark red lipstick. The fragrance wasn't her usual light floral scent, but something woody and sensual he didn't recognize. "Are you going out?" he asked, frowning. "I'm just running a quick errand to the supermarket," Amber casually replied, grabbing her purse. "I need a few things for the week." Brandon processed the mismatch between her polished outfit and the supposed trip to the store. "Don't you think you're a little overdressed just to buy milk?" Amber laughed, but it sounded forced. "Can't I feel pretty? I might run into someone I know." She quickly kissed the top of his head and left before Brandon could respond. It was Sunday morning. The supermarket was 10 minutes away. Why would anyone dress like that for something so ordinary? Brandon tried to brush it off, blaming the exhaustion from a 48-hour shift. But the pattern repeated itself the following Sunday, and the one after that. Every time, the same routine. Amber woke up early, spent an hour in the bathroom, left looking immaculate, claiming she was going to the supermarket, and returned 2.5 hours later with only 1 or 2 bags containing insignificant items: milk, cookies, a magazine. Nothing that justified so much time away. Brandon started paying attention. Amber hit her phone whenever he entered the room, flipping the screen face down too quickly. She began showering immediately upon returning home, something she'd never done before. There was a different energy about her on Sunday afternoons, a nervous restlessness. Guilt? Excitement? By the third week, Brandon checked the receipts Amber kept in the drawer. What he found confirmed his suspicions: $12 for milk and chocolate, $8 for a magazine and gum. Nothing that accounted for hours spent away from home. Brandon allowed himself to consider the unthinkable. Amber was having an affair. The question was no longer if, but with whom. And why specifically on Sundays? There was something calculated about it, a routine that suggested this hadn't just started recently. In the days that followed, Brandon kept up his normal routine, but now a chasm stretched between them. On the 4th Sunday, he was ready. He swapped shifts, claiming he had a dentist appointment. When Amber came downstairs at 9:30 wearing a red dress he'd never seen before, Brandon kept his voice neutral. "Heading to the store again?" "Yes, I need a few things," Amber replied, avoiding his gaze. "Drive carefully." Brandon waited until she left, grabbed his keys, and headed to his pickup parked on the street. He followed her, staying a safe distance behind as they drove through neighborhood streets. It was a clear autumn morning with light traffic. Amber drove away from their usual supermarket. Brandon's heart raced. She crossed 3 neighborhoods until reaching a residential area he vaguely recognized. When Amber turned onto a quiet street, Brandon slowed down. He watched as she decelerated in front of a well-kept brick house with a tidy lawn. The garage door began opening automatically. Amber drove inside, and the doors started closing, but not before Brandon saw a male figure appear at the entrance. A young man, tall, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. And then, in that split second before the garage door shut, the man stepped into the light. Everything stopped. Brandon recognized that face. He knew those slouched shoulders, the messy brown hair, the way he kept his hands in his pockets. It was Justin. His cousin Justin. Aunt Margaret's youngest son. The kid Brandon had taught to ride a bike. The 22-year-old, unemployed guy the family had let stay rent-free in the house Brandon's grandparents had left him. This house. This damn house was his grandparents' house. Brandon parked 3 houses down, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Memories clicked into place like grotesque puzzle pieces. Justin had always shown up at barbecues, always hovering near Amber, always offering to help. Brandon had chalked it up to his younger cousin's shyness. What an idiot he'd been. And Justin's unemployment. He always seemed to have money for new clothes, gas, haircuts. The family assumed he was living off savings. Now Brandon wondered if Amber had been giving him money. He couldn't stay seated. He got out of the truck and walked with purpose. Each step echoed in the suburban silence. He didn't ring the doorbell. He turned the doorknob, and it opened. Of course. Why would Justin lock the door when he was expecting his married lover? He stepped into the living room where he'd spent countless Christmases with his grandparents. The floral sofa was still there, worn with age. The curtains were the same. But everything now felt tainted. He heard voices from the hallway. Laughter. Amber laughing in a way Brandon hadn't heard in years, genuine and light. He followed the sound, his steps silent. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, he saw part of the bed where his grandparents had slept for 40 years. Amber sat on the edge, her back turned, still in the red dress. Justin stood in front of her, her hands resting on his thighs, looking down with a smile Brandon had never seen before. There was an intimacy worse than any physical act, the way they occupied the same space, completely at ease with each other. Brandon shoved the door hard against the wall. Amber leapt from the bed as if shocked, her face instantly draining of color. Justin stumbled over his own backpack, eyes wide with panic. For a moment, no one moved. The 3 of them frozen in a tableau of betrayal. Brandon, Amber whispered. No, Brandon said, his voice strangely calm. Don't say my name. Not now. He looked from Amber to Justin. How long? Neither answered. Amber cried silently. Justin seemed unable to speak. How long? Brandon repeated, louder this time, the sharp edge in his voice making them both flinch. 6 months, Justin whispered. 6 months. Half a year. Brandon did the math. April. It had started when Justin moved in. When Brandon and Amber had helped him move, acting like family. You're my cousin, Brandon said, staring at Justin. My blood. I taught you how to drive. I was there at your graduation. I defended you when my aunt wanted to kick you out. Brandon, Justin started. No. You don't have anything to say that I want to hear. He turned to Amber. And you? My wife. The one person I trusted completely. Getting dressed up for him every Sunday, coming here to have an affair with my 22-year-old cousin. It's not like that, Amber said quickly, her voice trembling. It's not just physical. Brandon, we connected. Justin understands me in a way that. Shut up. The words snapped like a whip. Don't romanticize this. You're cheating on your husband with a kid in our grandparents' house. Do you have any idea how pathetic that is? Justin took a step forward, trying to look brave. Don't talk to her like that. Brandon let out a humorless laugh. Now you want to be the gentleman? Where was that courage the past 6 months? Why didn't you come to me like a man and tell me you were in love with my wife? At least that would have shown a shred of honor. You don't understand, Justin said desperately. You don't know what it's like between us. I don't care about your teenage justifications. He looked at Amber. Grab your purse and keys and get out. You've got 2 hours to take whatever you want from our house before I change the locks. Brandon, we can talk, Amber pleaded. Please, let me explain. Explain what? How you destroyed our marriage. How you betrayed my trust with a member of my own family. There's no explanation that makes this better. No words can undo what you've done. He turned to leave but stopped at the door. Oh, Justin? You're out of the family. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are, Aunt Margaret, Uncle David, all the cousins. By the end of the day, you won't have a place at any family event ever again. You chose this. Now live with the consequences. Brandon walked out and returned to his truck. He didn't look back. Inside the locked vehicle, he rested his forehead on the steering wheel and let reality sink in. His wife. His cousin. 6 months of lies. But a new feeling began to form. Anger, yes. Pain, certainly. But also a strange clarity. He felt more betrayed by Justin, and that said something about the state of his marriage even before the affair. Brandon started the engine, already planning his next steps. Divorce lawyer first. Then a call to Aunt Margaret. Horrible, but necessary. 3 weeks later, he sat in the office of attorney Richard Chen, a man in his 50s with a formidable reputation. Richard listened to the story with a neutral expression, taking notes. Arizona is a community property state, Richard explained. Everything acquired during the marriage is split equally, unless there's a prenuptial agreement or extraordinary circumstances. And adultery isn't considered extraordinary? Unfortunately not, in terms of asset division. Arizona is a no-fault divorce state. However, Richard continued, there are other factors. You mentioned she might have been giving money to her lover? Yes. Justin hasn't had a job for months, but he always has money. If we can prove she diverted significant marital funds to the affair, that could affect the division. I'll need bank statements, credit card records, everything. Brandon nodded. I have access. Good. You mentioned you don't have children. That simplifies things. Richard paused. There's something else. Could your wife be pregnant? The question caught Brandon off guard. What? Not that I know of. Why? Because if she is, and if the child isn't yours, that significantly changes the legal landscape. It happened. 2 weeks later, Amber asked to meet him at a cafe. She arrived pale, thin, with dark circles under her eyes. Brandon felt a flicker of something close to satisfaction. She looked as miserable as he did. I need to tell you something, Amber said as soon as she sat down, her hands shaking. I'm pregnant. Brandon's world flipped upside down. You're joking. I wish I were. Tears streamed down her face. Brandon, I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything. Is it his? Amber nodded, unable to speak. Brandon leaned back, processing. A distant part of him noticed he wasn't surprised. Of course it was Justin's. How far along? 8 weeks. Does Justin know? Yes. He panicked. Said he's not ready to be a father. That it wasn't part of the plan. Brandon nearly laughed at the irony. So he had a plan? Because from where I was standing, it looked like reckless self-destruction. Please don't be cruel, Amber weakly pleaded. Cruel? You spent 6 months sleeping with my cousin, lying every single day, and now you're pregnant with his child. And you think I'm being cruel for pointing out reality? I know, she sobbed. I have no right to ask for anything. But I don't know what to do. What do you want me to do? Say it's all okay? Offer to raise my cousin's child? No, I just wanted you to know. Brandon stayed silent. Are you keeping it? I think so. I don't know. It's all a mess. Yes, it is. He stood up, grabbing his coat. My lawyer will be in touch. We'll add this to the paperwork. Make sure it's clear that this child isn't mine and I have no financial responsibility for it. Brandon, wait. But he was already walking out. A paternity test, conducted a few weeks later through a non-invasive prenatal DNA procedure, confirmed what everyone already knew. Justin was the father. The document became part of the divorce filing, an irrefutable piece of evidence in black and white. The family reacted as expected. Aunt Margaret was devastated, wavering between denial and blaming Amber for seducing a boy. Uncle David simply stopped speaking to Justin, his disappointment a silent, icy void. All the cousins sided firmly with Brandon. Justin was shut out of every family gathering. Brandon later heard that Justin had tried showing up at Thanksgiving 2 months afterward, but Uncle David slammed the door in his face. "You're no longer welcome," and Justin left in tears. Amber lost her job 3 months later, officially due to restructuring, but Brandon knew the truth. Co-workers had complained about the drama. Phoenix's retail community was small, and Amber's reputation had preceded her. The divorce was finalized in February, 4 months after the discovery. Because of evidence that Amber had used significant marital funds for the affair, $3,500 on clothes, expensive dinners, and Justin's traffic tickets, the judge ruled in Brandon's favor for an unequal division. Brandon kept the house, 80% of their savings, and the better car. He didn't feel victorious. Only deeply tired and weighed down by a sense of waste. 5 years reduced to paperwork. But life went on. Brandon threw himself into work, taking extra shifts at the station. His co-workers knew the basics, there was quiet solidarity. No one pressed for details, but they offered support, a game night invitation, a beer after shift, a well-timed joke. 6 months after the divorce, Brandon sold the house. Too many memories in those walls. He bought a smaller apartment near the mountains with a view of the desert. It was a fresh start, a space entirely his own, untouched by betrayal. During a morning trail run, Brandon met Sarah. An elementary school teacher, an avid runner, with a genuine smile. They started as occasional running partners, then friends, and eventually something more. Sarah knew about Amber and Justin but didn't treat Brandon like he was broken. She simply saw him for who he was, a decent man who'd been treated terribly and was trying to move forward. A year after the divorce, Brandon was at a family barbecue when he saw Amber for the first time since the cafe. It was the baptism of a cousin's child. Amber's mother, close to Brandon's aunt, had brought Amber and the baby. The air grew tense when Brandon arrived with Sarah. Amber sat alone in a corner, holding a 5-month-old boy with dark hair. She looked years older, the weight of single motherhood and isolation clearly taking its toll. There was no sign of Justin. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked quietly, her hand finding Brandon's. "Yes," Brandon replied, realizing it was true. Seeing Amber didn't trigger anger or pain. Only distance, as if watching someone else's life through a window. Brandon later heard through family whispers that Justin had abandoned Amber 2 months after the baby was born, unable to handle fatherhood. He'd moved to Las Vegas, cutting off contact with everyone. Amber was living with her parents, working part-time at a convenience store, struggling financially. There was a terrible symmetry to it. She'd risked everything for a romance with a 22-year-old and now found herself alone, excluded from her social circle, raising a child whose father wanted nothing to do with him, working a job that barely paid the bills. When their eyes met late that afternoon, Amber had tears in hers. She didn't approach or try to speak. She just held the baby tighter and looked away. Brandon felt Sarah squeeze his hand, a silent reminder that he had someone by his side. 3 days later, while clearing out emails, Brandon found a message from Amber sent that night. It was short. "I saw you with Sarah today. You both looked happy. I hope you are happy, Brandon. You deserve it. I'm so sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know. I destroyed the best thing I ever had for something that wasn't even real. This is my cross to bear." Brandon read it 3 times, then deleted it without replying. There was nothing left to say. Some mistakes were too big to fix with apologies. Amber would have to live with her choices. But Brandon allowed himself a moment of gratitude, for finding out when he did, for having the courage to confront the truth immediately, for a family that stood by him, and for Sarah, who'd come into his life at just the right time and showed him that not everyone betrays trust. The grandparents' house was sold 6 months after the scandal. No one wanted to live there after what had happened. The new owners didn't know about the ghosts, the Sundays when a wife betrayed her husband with his cousin in rooms that had witnessed decades of faithful love. And Brandon? He kept living. He worked shifts saving lives. He ran trails in the mountains. He built something slow and solid with Sarah. It wasn't a fairy tale with instant happiness. It was better. It was real. The life of a man betrayed in the worst possible way, who lost both a wife and a family member in one devastating moment, yet chose not to let that define him. 2 years after that October Sunday when he'd followed Amber to the garage, Brandon stood at the altar watching Sarah walk toward him in a simple white dress. His family was there, all cheering him on. Aunt Margaret was among the guests, tears in her eyes, a mix of joy for him and sorrow for the son lost to selfish choices. No one mentioned Amber. No one asked about Justin. That chapter was closed, sealed, filed away as a painful lesson about trust and betrayal, family and loyalty, and the consequences of choosing momentary gratification over lasting commitments. When Brandon said, "I do," he did so knowing exactly what those words meant now. He'd seen what happened when vows were broken. He'd lived through the devastation of discovering that the person he trusted most had chosen to hurt the one he loved most. And he'd survived. More than survived. He'd come out the other side stronger, more aware, and grateful for the people who'd chosen to remain loyal. The red dress, the opening garage door, Justin's face in that awful moment, they were all part of his story now, scars he'd carry forever. But scars are just marks left by healed wounds. They don't define who you are. They only show what you've survived. And Brandon had survived. And in doing so, he'd found something more genuine, not a perfect happy ending, just an honest new beginning built on truth instead of lies, conscious choices instead of impulsive passions, and mutual respect instead of secret betrayal. That was the kind of story worth living. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.